While we're doing, hey, hello to everyone and welcome to History Matters. And didn't have my coffee cup covered, and so does coffee. Nope, there you go. There, gotta make it so that I can see everything. Good morning to everybody. We are going to be talking about federal employees, civil service employees, a little bit about the history of it, to inform ourselves about what's happening in the present. But before we do that, I turn to my amazing and wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History, and it is my pleasure to always be here on Friday mornings with everyone. If you're new to us, please let us know in the chat so we can properly greet you. But the way this works is Joanne will talk about today's topic for about 30 minutes. You're free to engage in the chat, but if you have a question about today's topic, we would love for you to add that to the Q&A. I'll be back in about 30 minutes, and that's where I will look for all of your questions.
Okay. Well, in our time, sometimes it's hard to pick a particular topic to talk about, but today it seemed like it might be worth addressing civil service employees, federal employees, and the history of how they are or aren't linked with something that became known very early on as the spoils system, because those two things are indeed linked in some way. So that's the historical tale that I wanted to talk a little bit about, which will, I think, offer some important context for the moment that we're in, as far as what we're seeing in the way of tens and tens and tens, tens of thousands. I don't even have the full number for how many federal employees have been discharged, dismissed, fired. And it's confusing, particularly because in the glance that I had time to make this morning about numbers, of course, there are many being brought back after they were fired. So even the final numbers aren't clear, even if we had the time to look and put them all together. But at any rate, I did want to talk about what initially happened with the rise of political parties and civil service officers, and what that was seen to mean, and then the response to that, so that we can kind of see the give and take and understand a little bit about what that means. And what I should have said at the outset, because I never know how many people are here for the first time or not. If you are here for the first time or one of the first times, please say so in chat, because you will get a wonderfully robust welcome from the community, as well as my bird, who is very chatty this morning. You will get welcomed here. This is our 258th episode. I swear, I'm told that like 3 minutes before I begin talking, and I immediately forget it, but I think I got it right this time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about federal employees. And my thought when I came up with this topic was Andrew Jackson, because in a sense, the spoils system, and I'll define that in a moment, starts with Andrew Jackson. I did feel the need, however, to say that when Thomas Jefferson became president in 1801, when he took office, he was faced with a situation where the Federalists had been in charge of the government for the first 10 years of the government existed, for the first 10 years that the government existed. So all of these offices were filled with Federalists, and now he's a Republican president, and he needs to somehow get Republicans in office. So he actually did let go, discharge, fire a number of federal employees to put Republicans in their place. Now, he wasn't comfortable with it. He wrote about it, he explained it, and he said, I didn't have time this morning to find the letter, but he said something along the lines of like, come on, like there need to be some people in office that actually are related to the person who just got elected president. So he did do this, and it was partisan, firing people for party purposes. However, that took on an entirely new view when Andrew Jackson became president. Jackson really represents the rise of party politics in an organized way in American history. The rise of the Jacksonian Democratic Party. It was organized, it was networked, it had a lot of the trappings that we associate with party politics. And so in a way, it's not surprising that as the Jacksonian Democrats came into office, you then had the beginning of favored people being given jobs because they deserved patronage because they had been doing good, solid party service. Now, it's important to note Jackson's view on this. How do I put this? His view, what he said publicly and what he did privately, were not all the same necessarily. But the argument he made when pressed on this was rotation in office is an excellent thing, right? You can't, and it is true that for a while it had been the case that when you got into a government office, then there you were. And it was assumed, you know, as Jackson himself said, that it was a kind of property, a government office, like you were given it and you own it and it's yours. And he said, that's, you know, it's not the way it should be, that people should be rotating in office. So that was the way he justified this, is rotation in office is a good thing. On the other hand, he gave a variety of different offices to friends, to relatives, to old soldiers that maybe he'd served with, to newspaper editors that he liked, to one particular person that he made U.S. attorney for Southern New York. He said, quote, "Go to the duties of your office and make as much money as you can, but remember, you are to be always at my command." Okay, so the dynamic here was clear. And Jackson, when he came into office, made a big deal about the fact that he was going to make what he called a strict examination against unnecessary expenses, unnecessary federal positions. Supposedly in 18 months, about 10% of the 10,000 federal employees were replaced. And some of the higher positions he gave mostly to his political supporters. Now, 20 years before Jackson, the three presidents combined had removed only 66 civil officials who were appointed by the president. Jackson removed 252 out of 610, or just 45%. So he made a sweep. And according to one count, and I got this from historian Donald Cole, Cole's book, The Presidency of Andrew Jackson, that in 1830, there were so many houses put up for sale in Washington where these federal employees were living that there was a temporary decline in property values. So echoes of the past. So this is all happening under Jackson, but it got much worse after he left office, right? He argued rotation in office, he's rewarding party operatives, friends, relatives, and everybody else. But it got worse and worse and worse. Every new president, maybe not every single one, but over time, presidents saw this happening and contributed to it, and the numbers kept growing as far as who got in and who got replaced and why they got a job and not having necessarily any qualifications for the job that they were given at all, other than they were of the right party and had the right sort of relationship with the president. In 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes is running for president, and Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, came out and actually campaigned for him. And one of the things that he campaigned on was this issue, was what by then was called the spoils system. To the victor belong the spoils, right? You win an election, the spoils are yours, you can do with them as you please. It was so noted at this point that it made sense for him to take a stage and campaign for Rutherford B. Hayes by talking about the spoil system. So these are his words, because how can I not quote him when I'm talking about the spoil system? He said, "Our present civil system, born of General Jackson and the Democratic Party, is so idiotic, so contemptible, so grotesque." And then he went on to explain what he, and well, not him, Hayes, he and his life wanted to do that was different. He said, quote, "We will not hire a blacksmith who never lifted a sled. We will not hire a school teacher who does not know the alphabet. But when you come to our civil service under Hayes, we serenely fill great numbers of our minor public offices with Oh, no, actually, I take that back. I flip it. He says, when you come to our civil service nowadays, pre-Hayes, we serenely fill great numbers of our minor public offices with ignoramuses. Okay, so he's complaining, we actually want to hire school teachers who know the alphabet. He says at some point, I didn't write it down, but in that same speech, he says, we insist that if you hire a plumber, he needs to know the difference between the inside of a pipe and the outside of a pipe. So he's making fun again and again and again and again of the sorts of ignoramuses who are just being hired for favor because somebody likes them. The spoils system. Now, in 1883, so this apparently all of the spoil system and everything associated with it, kind of not surprisingly, gets amped up with the Civil War and all the possibility of spoil that go into wartime material and manufacturing and everything else. It got worse. So in 1883, President Chester Arthur signed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which was the first of its kind in US history. And it got strengthened over time. I'm going to come back to that momentarily. But it basically laid the groundwork for a professional bureaucracy on a large level, not grounded on party politics. It was intended to guarantee the rights of all citizens to compete for federal jobs without preferential treatment based on their politics. And there was a civil service commission created along with the act to have an open process of appointing federal employees. The entirety of civil service positions were not covered by this act. Supposedly only about 10% were covered by the initial act. By 1980, more than 90% were covered by that act. I'm going to come back to some of the reforms in a moment. It is worth noting that under President Wilson, when you applied for a job, you were also asked to send along a photograph of yourself, which was a way of racially profiling who was applying for jobs. So let's not pretend that this more merit-based system, not as spoils-based system, was totally free and easy and free of any kind of corruption at all. But the intention here was that people should be hired in one way or another based on merit and not on favoritism or their political party. Now, in 1978, we got the Civil Service Reform Act, which updated this Pendleton Act from the 19th century. It abolished the Civil Service Commission. It created instead the Office of Personnel Management, the OPM, which we hear so much about these days, the Merit Systems Protection Board, and the Federal Labor Relations Authority. So basically, it created new trappings as a way to protect government employees, as a way to hire government employees, as a way to look for fairness as opposed to favoritism, right? So I'm setting up a dynamic between spoil system, favoritism, merit, and civil service reform, that the reforms are in place so that you can't have a president who takes office and just throws everybody out and puts only people who are loyal to him in place, right? And thus here we are. Now, one might ask, given everything that I just said, why are we looking at all of these firings? Now, I want to talk for just a minute about what probationary employee means, because I think a lot of people assumed, and I might have mentioned this last week or the week before, I think I've mentioned it on a previous episode. I think a lot of people think, because of the word probation, that a probationary employee did something wrong and they're on probation, and so, okay, they should be fired. A probationary employee for the federal government is someone who has been hired in a job, but typically when you become a government employee, there is a probationary period when you're basically on trial, right? How's it working out? What kind of an employee are you? It's not necessarily easy to fire a probationary employee, but it's easier to fire that kind of employee than someone who's had an office for a long time and doesn't have, after you've been there for a while, you have more government protections taking care of you because you're out of your probation period. So part of the reason why we were watching probationary employees get fired is because if you're going to fire people, that's an easier group of people to fire. That's, I mean, it's kind of simple that way. The larger point that I wanted to make today is just, we had the spoils system, which rose with party politics. We had a number of different reforms, late 19th century, mid and late 20th century, trying in one way or another to say, you know what, merit actually counts. Can we put some regulations in place so that you can't just new president, new party, new employees, giving out spoils, installing in office just people who you like based on nothing but that? That's what those reforms are meant to do. So what we're looking at now, and the reason why these cases keep getting taken to court and judges keep saying this isn't right, and then we're sort of watching this happen anyway, right? That's where we are, is this moment where what's happening does not match the letter of the law as far as firing federal employees. People are taking it to court. Judges are saying this isn't right. Some of the mandates of the court are being kind of ignored, seemingly, by the Trump administration. Seemingly, there are Trump loyalists being instilled in federal offices because they're loyal to him, and that's the reason. Doesn't matter really what their qualifications are. And that's where we are, right? The important thing to see here is the reforms are meant to act against the spoils system, meaning people in office because you like them. Bad thing. It did not do good things for our government in the 19th century. It's why, you know, it became a public issue to be campaigned on in the late 19th century. It was very apparent that there were people put in office who had no qualification to be put in office and assumed that they could stay there for a while, right? And who needs qualifications anyway? Jackson, back in his day, said, and I think there was some similar line spouted by President Trump. Jackson said, you know, any government job should be made easy enough that anybody could do it. Right? We don't, you know, who needs actual qualifications anyway, right? A government job should be easy enough that anybody can do it. Well, that's nice to say, but the fact of the matter is civil servants, civil service positions are doing a number of highly technical and vitally important things, protecting our health, protecting our land, protecting any number of things. They are vitally important. And what's important about them, among other things, is that they're not political appointees for the most part. They are people with expertise. And I know in our time, expertise now, you know, experts are bad, supposedly. But if you want people to be watching out for your health, to be overseeing food and drugs, to be overseeing what's happening in the skies with airplanes, to be overseeing our national parks, to be overseeing any number of things, you actually need people who have some expertise in these fields where they're working. It matters. And the civil service is supposed to be, and has long been, a place where people who have that kind of expertise go to serve, not to serve a particular president, but to serve a purpose, to serve the public. They are public servants in a very real sense, which is why they don't come and go with administrations. They take office and they're there because of their expertise. They are very clearly serving the public. They are people to be, generally speaking, praised for committing their careers to helping the public at large, right? Generally speaking, that's what civil service employees with expertise, park rangers, people who work at the National Institute for Health, any number of things, right? They're there with expertise. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't people who aren't doing a good job, that there aren't people who perhaps should lose their job. I'm not going to say that every employee needs to be in place forever, but I am saying letting go of vast numbers of people for no reason, seemingly just because you've decided that you want to let them go so that you look like you're flashing the deep state, and then you're installing loyalists, supposedly creating actually a deep state, though that's not what people are saying. The logic of what we're seeing now is saying a lot about the balance between the spoil system and regulation. That is the moment that we're in. So I wanted to talk about this. I'm going to end a little early and open things up for question. I wanted to talk about this morning in part because I'm angry. I'm angry on behalf of the federal employees losing their jobs, in most cases, seemingly for no reason, because they're not absolutely loyal, because it is preferred to have an absolutely loyal person in the position. And these are people who have been in their jobs for many, many years with expertise, serving the nation, serving the public. And their reward for that is to be fired because it makes partisan sense at this particular moment. Not the only time that people have been moved around and fired for partisan reasons, but on this level, this many people seemingly with, the chainsaw slash and burn mentality and no actual logic, and then pretty unreliable figures about money being saved, being tossed around. We're watching courts respond, and we're watching the administration maybe not respond to the courts. That's a crisis. That's part of a bigger crisis. But I partly wanted to just salute federal employees who have been working hard for us in a number of different ways, and who don't deserve to be immediately fired for the most part. And that when you are mass firing federal employees, you are certainly opening yourself to the charge that you're shifting the dynamic and you're heading on back to favoritism, the spoils system, and corruption. It's a balance. And wise politicians, seems to me, would worry about that balance a little more than what's happening right now, which is not normal. There was the person at the joint address who held up a Democratic member of Congress who held up a sign that said this is not normal. And I appreciate that, because this is one of many ways in which, indeed, this is not normal. Okay. Oh, mug. Okay. So for those of you who are new here, I have a mug every week that has something to do with what we're talking about. I was a little challenged today. I don't have all my mugs still. Some of them are in a friend's house since I moved semi-recently. But this one, I saw it and I thought, mug, and I've never used it before. And it came from the NCHE conference that I gave a keynote out however many years ago it was. So someone out there probably gave it to me or brought it in to be given out to somebody. There was kind of a mug exchange. At any rate, take me to the lake. It's a tribute to national parks. That is the purpose of this mug. So, indeed. Yay, I saw, okay, you guys have me so used to seeing like little emojis floating up, and I didn't see any while I was speaking. I began to get very anxious.
That's a great mug.
It is a very good mug. So I salute national parks. Firing federal employees, and let me open chat, decimating entire departments of government, seemingly without rhyme or reason, to deconstruct and erode government from within. That's a topic for another time, but that's part of this too. So
George was telling us about, George is a former national park ranger, and he was telling us in the chat about all the parks he's worked at, including Ellis Island. And I was telling him I was a summer ranger, so they have a program for teachers in the summer, because we're off in the summer. So I did that for 4 summers in Richmond, and I loved it so much. And I learned so much. I became a better teacher.
So I'm angry on many, many levels, but firing park rangers and then supposedly getting ready to tear down national forests for money, like
Disgusting.
those
Yeah.
are ours. Those are national treasures. People throw around national treasure so much these days, but those are our treasures, those forests, those parks. I in my casting around this morning, looking at whatever I was looking at, I saw somewhere that a record number of Americans visited national parks last year. I don't have the figures for that, so I can't toss it around and I can't tell you where to go find it, but they're ours. They're just being stripped away and sold for parts.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, I want to open things up for questions.
Greta says, make sure you she suggests that you do a week on postal workers as well.
Ah, okay. Well,
Those tied to elections and mailing in ballots.
yeah. Well, yeah. Yes, indeed.
All right, so we have a lot going on here in the chat. Let's check out the Q&A. Okay, so Sydney, our good friend, undergraduate student from Georgia, says, what qualifications do federal employees need to have to work in the government? Is the president allowed to put people in federal positions even if they don't meet those qualifications?
Well, I mean, I think that varies for whatever job we're talking about. And there are some positions, I mean, I still think, and there are probably people here who know this better than I, there are some positions that for a long time have required some kind of exam, a civil service exam. I mean, I was employed by the Library of Congress for a while. I applied for the job. It went through whatever processes it went through, but I can't say I ever was tested. I had to fill out a lot of questionnaires, and they did a deep research into my past to make sure that I wasn't a criminal or something. They contacted like every landlord I'd lived with, every employer that I mean, it was actually a little spooky. People were like, what job are you getting? The government is going deep into your past. But you know, I don't think it's necessarily the case that, well, I know it's not the case that every government position has the same kinds of qualifications, but obviously if you're going to be hired to the National Institute of Health, you're going to be hired kind of with any other job because you have qualification. It is a job like any other job. It just happens to be for the government. Here we go. I just stopped because Dr. Nancy Walker. Nancy said, presidential political appointees don't require the same qualifications as a civil servant would have, but they have to pass. Right. So I had definitely had a serious background check. So, and cabinet officials are different, which is why I say in the government, one of the things I learned when I worked for the government is that there's a specific case about everything, even though there's supposed to be a general case for everything. But still, oh, there we go. And that federal positions, talk about qualifications. So it is a job, you know, they are jobs and you have to qualify for the job.
Yeah.
I'm trying to catch up on the conversation.
Yeah, the chat is.
Chat is as ever on fire.
Yeah, so we have some new folks and it's been so fun. All right, so Ben Hughes asks, he says, more an observation than a question, but he read biographies of John Adams and Grant and seems a coveted position is post Mr. Mistress, can't say it, post mistress or postmaster. And that kind of goes to Freda's comment earlier about you could do a whole episode just on postal workers. So any thoughts on those?
Post mattress.
I know that was hard to.
Yeah, no, they were coveted positions for sure. You had a lot of power. The postal system has always been really important. So, you know, it was a position that got attention, that had power, that had political sway and political power. And that was true local positions on a local level. If you were the local postmaster, the post office was where people gathered. That was where people got news. You were a sort of center of authority in some way. So yeah, they were coveted positions, postmaster, post mistress. You're right. It is kind of hard to say, but they were. And it is true that government jobs were often seen as great because you don't have much oversight and you don't have much to do. And yet there you are in your job, safe and getting a reasonable salary and pretty good benefits. You know, that there is some truth to that. It's just not the entire truth.
Yeah. Okay, Daniel. Oh, Daniel's question got cut off. Maybe he added it later. It looks like he hit return. Here it is. Okay. It says, since Moscow Donnie, I assume he's referring to the president, is showing himself to be a Russian asset, what can be done if he keeps losing in court, but seems to just ignore what the court says? And so I'm going to stop there. He had two questions, but I'm going to leave it at that. So this whole, I'm just going to ignore what the court says if I don't get my way.
Well, that's where we are. I mean, you know, how you go to, you're ignoring, the court says something, you ignore the court, and then there you are. That is precisely where we are. And that is why, I think I might have said this last week, but asking, are we in a constitutional crisis yet, is a pointless question. Like, why are we measuring this? We're 1 inch away. No, if he only does this, it's like, yes.
Well, the example that Daniel uses is pulling back restrictions on the EPA and taking down the EPA data so we can't see it.
Right.
And he said, what happens? We drink pollution.
Right. Well, right. So it's eliminating things, not evaluating things, the opposite, eliminating things and then destroying records so that you have no access, no point of comparison. I mean, the fact that I think there are health officials in Canada, among other places, sending information here about disease and such because we're not necessarily getting them on national websites. I mean, so yeah, the point here is to erode systems of government that can control government outside of the executive branch and the president, and to eliminate access to records that can offer any sense of accountability. That's some of what we're seeing right now. So yeah, along the lines of eliminating things, should I say this or not? I'll say it, but I don't have, I will say it and then ask people to please look it up. But I read this morning that according to the Associated Press, that the government is eliminating from government archives vast numbers of photographs and other such things because they supposedly are guilty of having something to do with DEI. Heaven forbid we like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that some of the things being eliminated are like a photo of, a nurse working in wartime, and it's a woman. So in the vast, because obviously what they're doing generally, and this has to do with federal employees as well, vast, sweeping away of everything. And then afterwards they're like, oh, we made a mistake, we'll put a little bit back. That appears to be the trend. And of course, the vast sweeping is dramatic and everybody sees it. And the president looks like, look at me, I'm doing vast things. Actually, I'm not. Elon Musk is doing vast things, but I'm here watching vast things be done. And then you don't so much acknowledge the fact that, no, actually, I made a lot of stupid mistakes and now I'm going to undo them. I mean, the way that things are being done right now regarding federal employees and everything else, that matters too, not just that it is being done, but the manner. Same thing with the, I spoke about this yesterday on Preet Bharara's podcast. And I talked a little bit about the tariffs being, passed. What do I make of that? And I said, well, in part, what I make of that is that's like a bullying gesture, right? It's the manner of them. It's the fact that the president can say, I'm going to pass a tariff, and it seems big and impressive and important, and then takes it back, but then we'll do it again and then takes it back. It's kind of the power maneuvering of that, but I think is the appeal of it, is the display, is the performance. So some of what we're seeing now, it's affecting lives. It's people are losing their jobs. People risk losing their homes. They're losing their livelihoods. And part of this happening is because on a certain level, it's performative and it looks like something is happening. And an administration can say, look at what we're doing. It's at the cost of the lives of American citizens, many, many, many lives. And it's the manner of how things are being done that is in part a big part of the statement.
Yeah, I spent a good bit of time this week. I had to comb through the close to 80 some learning resources we've created over the last 5 years because a bunch of links are broken that went back to Smithsonian or other government sites, and PBS has taken almost all of their links down. It's really messing teachers up because they don't have time to go back and search for an alternative link. It's just
right. So then it's gone. And I want to respond to Dave. I said on a certain level it's performative, and he says on every level it's performative. It is, but it's not just performative, right? So something, indeed, there's a performative component about everything. But my point here was some of it is just for performance sake. Some of it has more to it than that, but you're right. So Yeah.
Dave, our good buddy Dave says, what are the consequences of violating the Hatch Act or the Pendleton Act? It appears there are no consequences. So why do we even have laws on the book if they're just going to be ignored and get away with it?
Yeah, it's a question. I'm not going to talk about norms again, and I can't say that I ever would have classified the enforcement of law as a norm. But having laws on the books and having laws be enforced and having laws be enforced at a highly abnormal time, with a highly abnormal Supreme Court decision before someone becomes president, and other things happening that are not normal. And I say this as someone who has dedicated a large part of my career to talking about political violence. The fact that we're seeing people, members of Congress and otherwise, saying that they're afraid to stand up because they feel threatened. Yes, there has been violence throughout American history and throughout American politics, throughout American history. Not to the degree that people are afraid to do their jobs on a federal level because they fear for their lives, because the administration has, in one way or another, shown itself to not be unfriendly to that kind of threat.
All right.
Kind of keep up, folks. You guys.
It's flying by. Thomas Mackey has a great question. Thomas, I think you're my friend from Indianapolis, are you not? I think he was in my summer class last summer. He asked, has there ever been a published history of civil service in the US? That's an interesting question.
Yes. And I'm not going to be able to give you the title. I know that because this morning when I was researching, I came across it and did not have time to sit down and read it as I would have liked. And I'm not going to, I hate when people are talking to you and then they go away and like play around. So you guys are the masters. You can go find it.
We'll find it.
I found it on Google Books. I was casting about and looking for spoil system, civil service, and a variety of other things. But yes, there has been.
Okay. Ellen, our good friend Ellen asked, would the government be in any way liable for accidents that occur due to willful understaffing, such as the FAA air traffic controllers? Does government immunity extend to knowingly creating an unsafe situation?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll tell you, I've been thinking about that on another level, national parks, because I've been reading people who've been dismissed, and some of them are saying, I'm the person who's here for emergencies
Yeah.
in national park. So if that person is fired and they're not there, and someone is in the park and gets seriously injured, who's going to be held liable is a question. It's a valid question, and is a question that a good attorney for the person who is injured will follow through on, right? I mean, it is hard to see where these firings are helping the safety of Americans in any way, right? I don't see it. I don't see, food being less safe, drugs being less safe, the air being less safe, national parks being less safe. You may, feel that federal excess is being trimmed away, but it's not being trimmed away, and they haven't even said that. It's being chainsawed away with no logic or reason. At least if I were covering this period in the future and I was looking for like a key piece of evidence or something, because I do this all the time, looking back to the 19th and 18th century. Someone must have said something or done something that is so evocative and so symbolic of what I want to say that I don't even have to explain it. I can just put it in and it will sum everything up. The image of Elon Musk with the chainsaw, like in the future when historians are talking about this period, that's a good one. Like that, because that's what is happening. And they might be bragging about it, but the fact of the matter is they're just sawing the government to death and bragging about it at the same time. I'm trying to catch up. I want to get back to this question. Someone said, oh, I'm not gonna be able to find it. Someone said, maybe you could redo it. I saw someone say that someone that they know said that they feel safer under Trump. And I didn't catch the rest of it, so I can't respond to it, but if someone said that and wants to repeat it, yeah. Oh, that was Carol Lee? No. I have no idea. Okay, at any rate, I wanted to respond to that, but I can't find it. Jacqueline says at least Forest Service employees are trained in the safe use of chainsaws. Yeah, there's that too. You know, how do I want to put this? I don't want to say it's good to be angry, but it's valid. I'm angry. I know it's not good to be angry all of the time. I'm angry a lot. And I don't necessarily know what to do with that anger all of the time. But I think allowing it to remind ourselves not to be disengaged is good. We should be angry. We should be. This is outrageous, abnormal, so sometimes immoral, right? Some of what we're seeing. We definitely deserve to have feelings about it. Anger galvanizes. Thank you. Yeah, I'm someone said thank you for acknowledging that you're angry. Yeah, I'm very angry. I sometimes speak diplomatically to the point that Heather makes fun of me because I'm constantly trying to like weigh my words, but no, I'm just angry. I'm trying to catch up on what people are saying. Okay, are there more questions? I'm like talking so much.
So some people are putting suggestions in the chat and talking about looking things like there's a bald eagle nest that you can watch 24/7 and different strategies for what you can do when you're angry and anxious and that sort of thing. So that was more of a, I think that belongs more in the chat than the questions, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Someone, it just says iPhone 102, so it doesn't have a name on it, but it says, how does DEI affect merit and favoritism in federal appointments?
Well, so I said this yesterday at some point. Right now, DEI is being used by some in power in the same way that woke was before. Not defined, just like we think it's bad, whatever it is. And we're going to like eliminate things and fire things and destroy things because they're associated with DEI. Now, first of all, I would encourage everyone not to use that acronym. Say the words. Diversity. Diversity is not bad. If you say DEI, it hides the simple truth of what you're saying, is that these things that the D and the E and the I stand for, that these are obviously good things. And if you want to claim that diversity is bad, then at least say it outright. I'm against diversity, but I'm against DEI. And some of what that is doing is, you know, a lot of things can get masked under that. And the point of it being undefined and the point of it being vague is so that people will self-regulate and muzzle themselves because they're afraid to say something or do something that might get swept up as being DEI. So that's some of what we're seeing right now is deliberately not defined so that people will regulate themselves, be so scared to do anything that might seem DEI-ish that they'll get in trouble, so they'll stop. That's, you know, that's the logic of the violence and the bullying that I wrote about in my last book on physical violence in the US Congress. The point of it wasn't that they needed to be violent all the time. The point was Northern members of Congress needed to be scared that there might be violence. There only had to be a couple violent incidents and a lot of proof that bad things might happen for people, for some Northern congressmen to just sit down and shut up because they didn't want to get in trouble. They didn't want to get attacked. They didn't want to be beaten. They didn't want to be humiliated. So some of what we're seeing now, the logic of this bullying is because part of it is human nature, right? If you're afraid you're going to get attacked physically, or if you're afraid you're going to get fired, you will think twice. And that is partly the mindset of authoritarianism, right? If you're afraid of doing things, you don't do them. And that's part of what is meant when people say don't comply in advance. That's, you know, fear making you afraid to do things that you've been doing all along, afraid to teach about race in America. Uh-oh. maybe that bumps up against DEI. Maybe I better not talk about that. I'm going to get in trouble. And you decide not to teach about it, or you change how you teach about it because you might get in trouble. And now, I'm not saying everyone should violate all laws and not worry about their jobs, but can you see the logic of that? Is that we all get fearful of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, and we self-censor. And that's some of what this vagueness is about. So I encourage everyone, don't just say DEI. That's a mask. Just like woke has no meaning now. It's just like woke, bad. What does it actually mean? Most people couldn't say. But like this Georgetown, I don't know, folks, if you saw the Georgetown memo from, what was it? The district attorney in Washington. Someone's going to be able to help me here. And I'm not going to be able to do it. Georgetown received a letter from, I think, the DA of Washington, right, the DA in DC. So they were asked, are you complying with what we want about DEI? What are you teaching? We want to know what you're teaching. And my response to that was, define DEI. Are you doing what you should regarding DEI? What does that mean? It means, if you're not thinking hard, a response to that could be, uh-oh, I better be careful about what I'm saying and what I'm doing because I'm not define it. That made me think about, oddly enough, dueling, the rules of dueling. Because when two men are about to shoot at each other, before they shoot at each other, the first thing that happens is, what precisely did you say about me? The exact words. Give me the exact quote, define it, so that we are actually talking about the same thing. If we're going to do something dramatic, it's got to be laid out there. Exactly what we're saying, exactly what we're talking about. So don't unmask the masks. There are people who are going to say, I don't like diversity, but make them say it. Don't let them say, I don't like DEI, which, like I said, now is just some new version of woke and has no meaning. People aren't thinking about what that means.
Yeah. So Sherry, apologize if I'm misspelling or mispronouncing your last name, Sherry Marcoulier. She said that, do people understand the employees being fired are the tip of the mountain in an effort that went into developing the administrative state? She says she worked for 25 years at the second largest food manufacturer in the world. To get food safety rules, President Obama signed into law the I cannot talk today. Administration Procedure Act to govern the development of regulations requiring agencies to consider reasonable or accept and reject comments from the public. So people responsible for implementing those laws being fired, now there's no way for us to have input. So she wanted to know what the thoughts are on that.
Of the elimination of ways for people to have input?
Right. So apparently whoever used to enforce the Administration Procedure Act isn't there. So there's no one to offer your comments to because those people have all been fired. It's wiped out that whole mechanism.
Oh yeah, well there is a vast attack on accountability, right? And I've said it a million times here and I'll say it again. 3 pillars of democratic governance: the rule of law, free and fair elections, and the accountability of people who we give political power to us. The basics, right? Those are essential to democratic governance. And we're watching them all be attacked right now. And accountability is a huge one. If people can do things, this gets back to so the administration can violate the law and then what happens? This goes all the way back when the original January 6th happened. My fear at the time was that if people on a high level were not held accountable for that, the crisis of accountability that would unleash would be off the charts. Because how can you not be held accountable for trying to overturn an election? And I'm not talking about normal people, the rank and file people who were there. I'm talking about people with power who smiled on it, caused it, helped it. That moment to me, again, thinking like a historian of the future, that moment is going to be a moment that is a kind of turning point.
Yeah, and Sherry said that the people that got fired are the ones that are also responsible for making sure our food is safe.
Right. Right. No, but this is what I'm saying, is that there's no way in which we're safer. There are many ways in which we are less safe and will become increasingly less safe, right? Because people are being let go now. What that means is a little bit down the pike, we'll be seeing the impact of that as the quality and checks on things vanish.
And as someone who lives on the East Coast, like you do, hurricane season is coming and they fired half of NOAA. And someone put in, I think it was Jacqueline said, well, they said, we don't need NOAA. I can just look at the weather on my phone. Who do they think puts the data up on your phone? Hello. So, I've lived through quite a few hurricanes when I taught in Richmond, and that's scary to think that we won't have those warning signals. How will we know when to evacuate? I mean,
Yeah.
nobody seems to know
On
who's
a certain level, and I think back in 2020, anyway, for a very long time, it has been apparent to me that a lot of Americans don't connect the fact that the postal system, that the National Weather Service, that the roads being in good shape, that any number of these things are done because of local or national government. That they're not just there automatically, that, and National Weather Service, that's a great example, that people are like, why do I need the National Weather Service? I'll look and on my phone. It's like, connect the dots, right? And people don't have that sense of connection, particularly now that we feel that we have the power of the universe on our phones, and we don't think to our detriment on many levels about where the information comes from. We don't think about that often as news consumers, and we have to do that more than ever before. But we don't think about that anything on our phones. Like, where does the power for this come from? And the thing is, Louisiana, Florida, there are red states down there. But so here's the thing: hurricane season, National Weather Service being ripped apart. And this is well, let's talk about this in the after.
Do we have time for one more? I think I can combine
Yes,
a George,
yes,
the park
yes.
ranger question with the Dale down in Williamsburg question. I'm going to try it.
Yes.
So George was asking if Alexander Hamilton, when he was hiring his workers for the Treasury, only hired Federalists. And Dale asks more in general, with all the mass firings and loyalist position postings, is there a historical precedence for this level of corruption that we see today?
Okay, so the first question, yeah, I mean, Federalists hired only Federalists for office. So for sure there was favoritism, and for sure party mattered. I can't speak for all of the Federalists put in office. I can say that, Hamilton had lists of names that he was checking to see what their qualifications were, what kind of person they were. So I don't think it was like, how loyal are they to me before I give them a job in the Treasury Department. So it's not quite the same thing. But yeah, I mean, the idea that if you have a choice and you're going to put someone in office and you're president and you're going to favor someone from your party, I'm not saying that favoritism never happens, will never happen, can't happen. Parties are parties. I'm talking about massive firing of people and replacing them with loyalists with very few qualifications. That's a different thing entirely. I will say, and darn, I wish I thought of this before. Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter, I believe, to George Washington in 1792, September of 1792. And may I pat myself on the shoulder for knowing that right off the cuff, in which he complained about Hamilton giving treasury positions to friends and relatives and brothers of brothers. And he accused him of this, like, that in one way or another, he's giving jobs to people he likes. So it's not a new, it's not a new charge. But we're talking partly about scale and partly about purpose. So anyway, what was the second question?
He was just asking, with all these mass firings, is there any other historical precedence for that level of corruption?
Well, there's been plenty of corruption in American history, and plenty of partisanship and plenty of favoritism and plenty of spoil system and plenty of, it's important to know that when we're in this moment and we're experiencing this moment and we're seeing things that are blatantly wrong, it isn't necessarily because they've never happened before. It's because perhaps they've never happened on this scale before, with this kind of justification before, with people in power who are not necessarily wedded to the norms of democracy, right? The moment matters. So I would be the last person as a historian to say there's been no corruption or very little corruption and that suddenly we're corrupt, right? No. And I bet most of you out there wouldn't say the same thing either. But the scale, the level, the rationale, the purpose, the context, the background, the people who are doing it, what the people who are doing it are loyal to, all of these things are of the moment. And they're a huge part of the danger of what's happening right now. So unprecedented, to say that something is unprecedented, I think it doesn't mean it's never happened before in the context that we're living in. Unprecedented has to do with the scale and nature of what we're seeing right now and how it's happening and who is doing it and how it's being responded to. Okay.
All right. There's a couple of questions that are more after party-ish, so I think we're good.
Okay. I think we are like right at the minute. So
I know.
oh
Right?
my gosh, this never happens. Okay. So let me then say, and well, I'll ask in the after party. Let me then say thank you all for coming to engage on a Friday morning in the conversation of democracy, as I say every week, and I will say it every week. Being able to be here in a group, even better, in a community, to ask these kinds of questions, to hash things out, to try and figure things out, to not necessarily all agree, it matters. If you go from this and move on to talk with others and ask questions with others and figure this out with others, even better. What we do here is wonderful and feels magical to me, but anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. Get a group of people together and talk and try and figure things out. Anyone can do it. We just happen to be a wonderful community of people, so it feels magical. But what we are doing here is a form of democracy in action. And for that reason, it and things like it are important. I want to thank my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, and I want to thank John, who I got to see this week and haven't in a long time. And I want to thank Claire and Jessica and NCHE for all that they do to make this possible. And I want to thank all you folks for being here. As I said, it matters, and being part of this community every week matters a lot, certainly to me, and I think it probably feels like it matters to you. On a personal level, I think for all of us, it matters. So thank you for being here and being part of this community. And now what's going to happen is we're going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording. I almost forgot this part. We will no longer be recording. I was like getting ready to sign off and I was like, I forgot something. We will stop recording so that we can be even freer and easier in our conversation than we were before. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, then stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. Well, I think Facebook is not working today, so I don't have to say the Facebook part, but just in case, if you were watching from Facebook, you would need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. Thank you, someone, for saying save chat, because I forgot to do it last week. Save the liver. Okay.
Well, I usually do that after the after party, but yeah.
Oh, okay. But still, I didn't do it at all last week, and it's the first time ever. Okay.
I can send it to you because I put it in Slack every week.
Okay.
It only stays there for 90 days now because we have free Slack. We don't have anybody paying for it.